What we want to spend the rest of the time on is databases, applications.
So everything that I talk about databases here, think about physical servers with volumes and file systems as well. This will apply for that too. So conceptually, here is how it works. So you have Actifio, you provision some storage, and we have the snap pool, right? So we have this snap pool is a logical container on some physical disk. So the first thing that we are going to, and this is a database server, what the entire industry calls as agent, we call it as connector. So you put an Actifio connector on those database servers or physical servers. Then what we do is, it's pretty simple. The first thing that we do is that we create a virtual staging disk, right? It's dynamically, whenever the job starts, we'll create a dynamic staging disk, which is a virtual disk on the database server, right? So now we position the storage there. The next step is for Actifio to take the next logical step, which is talk to the application, make sure trigger a VSS snapshot if it's a Microsoft application, or if it's Oracle, leverage the right RMAN API to put it in get the database consistent mode. So that's what we do next. And now once we take that step, the third step is obviously to figure out what are the change blocks. Remember I mentioned about how we do incremental forever. So with RMAN, we query using an RMAN API and ask for change blocks, and RMAN gives us the change blocks. So what we do then is we write the change blocks into the staging disk. So that's how we do an incremental. And then when the next thing happens, rinse and repeat the same thing.
Okay, but SQL Server doesn't have that API.
So good question. So for SQL Server, what we do is that we have remember our connector that's installed there? It has a very lightweight software which can keep track of exactly what blocks are changing. So if it's
so you insert a filter driver.
It's a very lightweight filter driver
to keep, and you just build a journal of the change blocks.
But it's not even a journal; it's a bitmap. So it's just clean or dirty, 1 or 0, right?
Right.
No history there.
Right.
Just did that block change yesterday?
Okay.
So there's no copy on writes or none of that crazy stuff going. All we are doing is imagine a chessboard of 64 blocks. Which blocks changed colors, and we will remember that.
And with 2 VSS snapshots in that information, we now have change block tracking for SQL Server.
Yep.
So is that bitmap in addition to what VSS is doing?
Yes. VSS gets at the app consistency at 2 discrete points in time, and then the bitmap tells us which blocks we need to read out of that second VSS snapshot to reconstitute that image on our side.
Okay.
So you're not halting the database in any way. You're not. I imagine the same thing works under a SharePoint environment.
Yep.
SharePoint with SQL. Yep.
Absolutely.
Same thing.
Excellent.
So now that we've figured out what are the change blocks and we wrote them to this virtual dynamic staging disk that came up here, the next step is obviously to take out the staging disk from there. So now Actifio knows, okay, so the backup is done, the incremental backup is done. So the next thing what we do is internally within Actifio, what we call as an Actifio software snapshot. Nothing to do with storage snapshots. This is our own software snapshot to remember that, okay, I have a good point in time image right now. And then we will move the metadata pointers and create a virtual synthetic full. Right? So that's what we're doing. So that's how we do it for databases or physical volumes or anything else.
And this is really the key to the core technology. All the data is on our disk is in native format, and we are taking just the block level incremental changes between 2 discrete points in time that are app consistent and simply updating them onto the disk. So if you think about a backup analogy, it's like doing incremental backup and then an incremental restore at the same time every time. So what we have on our disk is usable, native format. It's not an RMAN dump. It's the database, right? Because we've done the extraction and the merge. In the case of Oracle,
so that snap pool is going to present a LUN that has the content of the database at the time of the last backup.
Exactly right. Wherever you want it to go, multiple copies. And that's really the core to it's very much like the VADP idea with VMware, if you think about how that works.
The native format part, you're not really storing it in native format, but you're presenting it in native format.
We have what we call virtual data pipeline.
Because there's a whole bunch of metadata pointers.
Sure, we synthesize which blocks you need and what places from what time dynamically. Yep.
Okay, so, and the result is this familiar cylinder by now, wherein after the first full, it's always incremental forever, and then you have the virtual fulls. So that's how we ingest the data into Actifio, right? So now let's try to see how would people access the data? Remember the use case of one database and all of you trying to get virtual databases on your test machines? This is how you would get. So we have the snap pool and we have all the various points in time. Basically, it's very simple. This is where our core IP is, right? All the patents we have is about how do we figure out and quickly synthesize a virtual database of this and present it to all the test machines. And so if it doesn't matter whether it's one machine or it's 10 machines, it takes the same amount of time. And it does not matter whether it's the data volume is 1 terabyte or 50 terabytes. It takes the same time.
Yeah, conceptually, it's
Because
the
it's
same
all
as creating a metadata clone in a storage system.
Right. So that's right. Our software behaves like a storage system at this point because it's exposing all these virtual LUNs to those test machines. But we also take a step beyond that and integrate with the databases to bring up the databases online.
Behaving in that way is the only way for this to work at scale with performance. No one's invented another way to consume data other than like a storage device. It's just that we have a ton of software around applying that horsepower to this problem.
And to access these clones, you're in band.
Well, the data comes from us. So it's not in band with production at all.
No, but in band with the test workload.
Correct. We are presenting the disk from the Actifio system. Absolutely.
Right.
Yep.
So Other, you've got your filter driver in the database for the backup. What do you have on the database for the restore is it going to then mount a LUN, or how does that actually?
Well, we're literally going to walk you through a demo if we can I know we're a little bit short on time, so we'll get to that if you can hold that for 5 minutes.
So the next one is about self-service, right? So we talked about how do we capture, how do we provision. From a self-service standpoint, all of you, for example, if you're all having access to those test machines, it's very simple. You log on, you browse all the points in time that you are allowed to based on the role-based access control, and then you pick a point in time, and then you say, provision that virtual database for me, and then you will see those virtual databases on those test machines. It's that simple, everything in a self-service fashion. And the second one is obviously the entire database comes up online. So no DBA needed, no storage admin needed. It's truly self-service. And the third one, sorry?
That's why I don't just want to do metadata clones on my on my primary storage.
Yeah. And the third one is you can also reprotect the test environment. So if all of you have, as part of the latest and greatest software testing, if you have made any changes in the database or you want to proactively protect the database because of the fact that you're going to do destructive test cases where you're going to corrupt the database or drop tables, you could also do that. You could create a bookmark, corrupt the table, do whatever you're testing, and then you rewind back to that bookmark. And the last but not the least, there's a big benefit for production support guys because they want to do the root cause analysis as quickly as possible. The last thing they want to do is wait for 5 hours before a database comes up online on their test machine. So it's useful for them too. So now we'll quickly jump into demo for SQL and Oracle databases.
Yeah, so we will, Howard and Julian, we will answer those questions as a part of this conversation. I just wanted to jump into it because I know we're a little short on time here. So I'm going to go back to my user interface here. So what we showed you before was what we call Resiliency Director. For the rest of this demo, we're going to jump over to what we call Actifio Global Manager, which lets you take an eye on all of your Actifio systems, whether they're software appliances, whether they're hardware appliances, on your premise, at your DR site, in the cloud. It gives you a single pane of glass to manage all the data. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start with a Microsoft SQL demo and really explain what's going on as a part of that. So let me start off by logging into that server right here. This one. So this is Microsoft SQL Server in our demo lab here at Actifio, which is down the street in Needham, Massachusetts. And what we're going to show you here is just really show you a Microsoft SQL integration, but also show you a use case around hybrid cloud. I've got a customer that wants to take data from where it is now and they want to use it maybe in AWS for test and development, analytics, whatever it might be. Let me connect to the production side of things here. And I don't know if you guys can read that or not, but we've got a database here called BigDB. And so let me open up a query here. You guys see that okay? I'm just going to do something really trivial here. Just show me all the rows from one of these tables. So you can see we've got a bunch of rows in here. This is how big is this one, Anthony? How big is the database?
It's approaching 2 terabytes.
It's about 2 terabyte SQL database, with a bunch of rows in it. We're going to delete one of these. So let's pick a number, maybe 13. Okay, John Doe. We're going to get rid of it here on the production side, so to speak. So I'll go ahead and do that. All right, delete from that simple, it's about the extent of my SQL knowledge. So did my select all, and now I'm doing my delete from where ID equals, right? So that's going to run, and then We'll just quickly go back and look and make sure it's gone. Select. Okay, so we deleted ID number 13, it's gone, right? It goes from 11 to 12. So now what we're going to do is in Actifio, we've got this application already under management through the magic of television. So I come here to Application Manager, and the name of that database is BigDB. So in my global manager here, I can just search for it. And
Subtle.
what's that? Yeah, it's
Big
a very
DB,
descriptive
it's
name.
subtle.
It's a very descriptive name. So there's BigDB, and I clicked on really want to manage the SLA for it. And this shows, we'll come back to this in a minute while the job's running. This shows how we're managing the data, where we're storing it locally, where we're storing it remotely, how often we're updating it, RPOs, RTOs, all that sort of stuff. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run the replication policy, right? So I click on Run SLA, started the job. We can come over here to our system monitor, and this is basically job management type stuff. So I'll show me my running jobs. There you go. You can see the job is running. And so what we're doing right now is we are taking, if I go back to my other picture here, on my application manager, it's a good visual aid we can use to kind of walk through this. So what we're doing right now is on that SQL database that we just logged into and deleted ID number 13, we're now running a capture job. So in this case, it's a Microsoft VSS snapshot, because it's a SQL Server database, in conjunction with that in-memory filter driver change block tracking that we've applied to it. It's going to run pretty quick because we didn't change a whole lot, right? We're going to take that data, we're going to bring it into the Actifio system, just the changes, the change blocks. So let's say it's a megabyte or something trivial. Then we're going to globally deduplicate and compress just the change blocks. So I'm going to take that megabyte, dedupe it down to 500 K, and then compress it to 250, for example, whatever it is. Then I'm going to replicate that to an Actifio system running in AWS, in Amazon. Once it lands there, I'm then going to rehydrate the 256K back to a megabyte, and then I'm going to insert it, the right blocks in the right spots in that virtual image, exactly where they go. So what I end up with is I take an application consistent picture of that database from right now, and I'm going to have that available on my 2 terabyte data set in AWS, something along the lines of, I want to say probably 4 or 5 minutes. That's how long it's going to take end to end, something like that. So to come back to a couple of the questions while this job is running, and I'll go back to my job screen here.
Do you need to restart the database in AWS to?
Yes. Yeah. So what?
That would be too clever.
So what we're going to have? Well, we can do it end to end if you like with some APIs and things like that. But in part of that resiliency director can be a part of that conversation too. But in this case, what it's doing is it's keeping the image there ready to go in case you want to mount it up, in case you want to fail over, in case you want to use it. So after this job finishes, we will then bring it up all the way to the last mile. And Howard, this kind of ties in to your question. Why can't you just use storage array snapshots for this kind of thing? You certainly can. That locks you into.
But I'm not going to get the database integration.
Absolutely not. It's going to have the wrong SID if it's an Oracle database. It's going to have the wrong settings. You're not going to be able to do the self-service. The self-service and the automation part of this are absolutely huge. If you look at a large enterprise, a well-run large enterprise, for them to get data from a production environment into test and dev, I've been doing this for about 6 years now. The best you're going to hear is about 2 weeks. That's the best. Most of them are 6, 8 weeks or longer. And the reason is not the technical challenge. The reason is the process. All the tickets that have to be open with 3-day lead times. You got to open a ticket with the storage admin, provision a LUN, that takes 3 days. Then you got to open a ticket with the sysadmin to put a file system on the LUN. That takes 2 days. Then you got to open a ticket with the backup admin to do a full restore onto the file system. That takes 2 days, but you can't do it on the weekend. You got to wait till Wednesday. Then you got to open a ticket with the DBA.
Yeah, but I could open a ticket with the storage guy to clone and skip 4 of those 3 days.
Absolutely, but you still have the last
But I still need the DBA to connect that LUN and fire it up as
absolutely,
needed.
and you're still using your tier 1 production storage for test and dev. You might not want to do that for environmental reasons.
That one I can argue both ways.
Since that's happening,
Yeah.
let me ask you a question. Just imagine, hypothetically, that somebody decides to do test and dev on production storage on the snapshots. Let's assume, hypothetically, the storage goes down. Not only the production, of course, gets impacted, but the entire test and dev teams, which means the entire next release cycle, also gets impacted.
If production's down, I don't care that test and dev is down.
Yeah. From an IT standpoint, you're right. The current projects, you're not live anymore, right? So whatever your live applications, but there's a bigger problem because most large enterprises, they're betting their money on the next release. That's huge for them. That's a big problem for them if their dev and QA cannot be productive. So people are actually changing the way they look at dev and test environments. They are now, I have seen organizations who say dev test environments are as equally important as production. Production goes down, I get impacted, no doubt about that. But if dev test cannot happen, my next release is delayed, and that's a big revenue problem for them. So, dev test is no longer treated as a secondary citizen anymore. In some shops, large shops.
In thought leaders, but like I said, I can play that both ways. To some extent, I'd like you to do the database integration,
absolutely,
and call the snapshot APIs on my primary storage and do in place rather than you make a copy for a lot of the test and dev cases.
All right.
How is the storage in AWS handled? Is it going through an Actifio AMI that's been deployed?
Absolutely. Yeah, great segue. So while we were talking, I logged into a SQL server in AWS now. So now I'm not on-prem anymore. I'm in the cloud. What we have there to support this is we have our technology in a virtual appliance we call Sky. It's running. It's available via AMI. It's running in AWS. That's what we're replicating to. And through the same global manager, I can command it on demand to spin up this virtual copy and present it dynamically to this host.
So is it a LUN presented to that SQL server in Amazon? So
Absolutely.
A physical virtual server on premises, LUN pointing to primary data, replicated to AWS, and then a LUN within the SQL server in AWS talking to Actifio, to the Sky.
Yeah, if I'm tracking it right. So we have an Actifio system on premise, and that could be virtual or physical. It's collecting the data. Using a virtual disk to do so, using that VSS and change block movement. It replicates from that Actifio system to the Actifio system, IP to IP in AWS. The Actifio system in AWS is a virtual machine, of course, and it has storage assigned to it. In this case, it's EBS.
Okay.
If we get to it, we're going to show you some S3 as well.
So how many companies do you have that used it to migrate to the cloud?
I don't know if you have any market data on that. More than a few.
We have around 12 to 15 companies who are actively leveraging test data management in AWS. They're replicating the data from primary site, their production site, to do test and dev in AWS.
You can't do format conversion, so you couldn't migrate a VMware virtual machine from on-premises to AWS to spin up as a virtual machine.
We can take the data from.
Take the data from it.
I can give you the C drive, the D drive, and the database into your SQL Server build in AWS. That's typically what our customers do. So they'll deploy their template, their AMI, if that's their SQL Server build. We take the database from wherever it is, physical, VMware, Hyper-V, we don't care, and we'll bring it up, just like I'm about to show you in AWS, inside of that VM. So without further ado, let me go ahead and do that. This is the SQL Server database that's got a C drive, right? And it's got, you can see there's one database there right now called AWS DB. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to that same single pane of glass here, and we're going to go back to Application Manager, Big DB, and now instead of managing the SLA, right, which is running a job, I'm going to go to Access, which is, as you might imagine, accessing. And so now I'll take my data, this dedupe async is what we call it, a replicated image. I'm going to click on Mount. And I'm going to pick my host. Now in this case, to just get this set up for just the bare minimum, so I'm going to choose SA Demo WinSQL. And I'm going to provide some application-specific stuff. What's the SQL instance? To your question before, Howard, right? What's the SQL instance you want to connect to bring this database up? That's the last mile. How do I make this usable? And what do you want to call it? We'll call it, TFDDB. How about that?
We like that.
And this is the part where you really want to make sure you typed everything right when you're doing your live demo. SA-demo-win-16. Okay, good. Anthony, look good?
Bad eyes.
Okay, reassuring. I'll click on Submit, and that's going to start another job. And so I'll go back to my system monitor if we can look at it if you like, but I just as easily show you over here. So what's happening now is that virtual appliance that we have in Amazon is going to dynamically do the reverse. It's going to take a virtual disk that's got the image that we want on it, that we selected, the most recent one. It's going to present it to this host, right, a block device. Then it's going to talk to the piece of software that we have running on the host called a connector. It's going to tell it to scan the bus. And that might happen 2 or 3 times over the next couple minutes or however long that takes. Then it's going to find the disk. It's going to look at the IDs on the disk on both sides, on the local side and on the source side, and say, yep, that's the disk. Make sure it's the right disk. Then it's going to automatically choose a drive letter. I could have specified one. There's a bunch of options we didn't go into there. It's going to automatically choose a drive letter, maybe Z drive or Y drive or something like that. So that's the first thing we're actually going to see here in the demo in the next couple minutes, is it will bring up that volume. That's going to represent what that database looked like at the time that the last job ran. So that'll take a minute or two. That's the first thing we're going to see. Once that happens, then we're going to take it the last mile. We're going to actually do SQL stuff and point it to the files, the MDF files, the LDF files that are on that particular volume or volumes, and actually attach the database and start it and get it running. And this is what the customers, the actual users want. And a lot of our larger customers, the people doing dev test, they don't have access to log into the server. They are literally just connecting to a database. They don't have a shell account. You can't get there from here.
So it's not just a dumb database mount that you basically have a G drive for a database, for example, and you attach the G drive, and SQL already is expecting a G drive there and boots up with all the instances. You're actually doing an attach in SQL as well.
Exactly right. This is all dynamic. You could do 10 of these at once, which we'll show you as well. So there's the Z drive that wasn't there before. If I drill down, it's going to inherit the same, whatever production looked like. There's my data file, big DB, 1.7 terabytes or so. There's my log file for this particular one. And depending where we are in the job, when I go up here and refresh, there you go, TFDDB. I now have a new 1.7 terabyte SQL database in the cloud with the most recent data on it that I can make virtual copies, do my test and development, do my analytics, recover a row, whatever you need to do. So
Just to add, Brian, sorry,
please.
Just to add to that, right? You don't have to understand all of Amazon's best practices to import into an RDS or anything else. It works the same way it worked on the on-premise in the cloud as well. So it's a single workflow that you use to orchestrate, be it on-prem or in the cloud.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chuck.
And the advanced options on that, on the restore job or the access job, would have included the data scrubbing piece in there.
Yeah, in this particular case, that's another step we call workflow. So a technique called live clone. So what we would do is you would do the data masking first, and then you would replicate it.
Right.
So that no unmasked data would show
data
up.
masking at the source appliance.
I mean, there's multiple ways you can do it, but typically you do the data masking, usually in the prod environment, so that no data that ever gets to the dev test environment in a large, financial services organization. They don't want any data that has not been masked to cross that, data center boundary into the test environment. So you do that on the source side. Let's keep it going because we do have a few more things we want to show you, and I know we're running short on time here.
So you could also replicate, you could have 5 source SQL servers, and then therefore in the same way, just put them all into one for your DI or your test. You don't have to match your SQL servers on both
Absolutely
sides.
not. Right. I could take any database from any one of these SQL servers I'm managing and stick it in here, from physicals, from virtuals, that came from Hyper-V, that came from VMware, that came from AWS. To us, data is data, whether it's in your data center, with a service provider, or in the cloud. And we want to just give you the ability to use it. That's really what Actifio is really driving for.